Welcome to Redtastic. Story 1. I, 18 male, came from a poor family in a secluded hometown in the province. I was able to finish high school through an education subsidy, but I wasn't able to pursue a college education due to financial difficulties and a lack of opportunities. When my aunt learned about it, she took me to work as a full-time storekeeper in their shop to earn a living and save up to go back to schooling. Although I was underpaid for all the work and overtime, it was still better than having no job in our hometown. My food and accommodations were provided by my aunt, so I didn't complain about anything further. The first months were hard and physically tiring, but I was able to adjust in the following months as I got more familiar and used to it. I was a storekeeper during weekdays and was assigned as cashier every weekend. One day, my 21-year-old cousin, who was my aunt's eldest son, came home. He was a college dropout and unemployed, and my aunt didn't know where he was going whenever he was leaving home. But she seemed unbothered and already used to it. In fact, she was doting on him and just let him do whatever he wanted since he got back home. When my aunt introduced me to him, he didn't acknowledge my presence and treated me as a random employee, which I find kind of rude. But days after living with him, I noticed his substance addiction, which kind of explained his behavior. I didn't want to get involved with any of his doings, so I was also just ignoring him the whole time. But one day, as I was closing the shop, I saw him take money from the cash registry. I didn't tell my aunt about it, thinking she knew, but the next day my aunt accused me of stealing the missing amount from the sale because I was the cashier that day. She was furious and started calling me a thief in front of other employees. I tried defending myself by telling her the truth, that her son stole it, but that only made her even more furious. Of course, she would believe her beloved son over me. I didn't know how to defend myself then, so I told them to check the CCTV footage. But she insisted there was no need to do that. She fired me right at that moment and told me to leave the house so she wouldn't have to call the cops and have me arrested. I was only 17, a minor, naive and helpless, so I left. A few days ago, my aunt reached out to me through a phone call asking if we could accommodate her eldest son in the meantime. She never said the reason, but for her to send her son to our small house in a secluded town, I assumed there was a serious reason behind it. I knew about her son's substance addiction and I witnessed his act of stealing, so I speculated that he had done something wrong and was probably hiding from it. I told my parents to refuse because we didn't want all that trouble, but my aunt tried gaslighting them, stressing how they had accommodated me in their home for the past months, fed me, and let me work in their shop. My speculation grew bigger, so I refused because I didn't want my family to be involved in any of that matter. So, I ended the call and blocked her number. That was the last time I heard from them again. Am I the a-hole for refusing my aunt's favor after they accommodated and fed me for months and even offered me work? Update. Okay, my aunt called my parents and was sobbing hysterically. Her son is in a gang and they tried breaking into a store. They couldn't, but police identified him and he's now on the run. With police in his tail, I'm so glad we didn't let him in. Bullet dodged. You did the right thing, OP. Your aunt wanted you and your family to harbor a fugitive. You and your family could have gotten a sentence for that. Your aunt must have known her son was engaged in some bad things, but she decided to turn a blind eye to it. She even sent you away and branded you a thief to cover up for her son. You made the right call not involving your family in their mess. Story 2. My wife is a stay-at-home mom while I work full-time. We have 2 kids that I help do 50% of their care, while she handles cooking and cleaning and the other 50% of childcare as well. I'm sociable by nature and am fast at making friends whether at work or outside of it. The problem my wife has is that I invite friends and coworkers, guests, over every few days to my house for dinner or lunch. Restaurants aren't an option now due to budget. My wife said she has to cook for my guests, though I never tell her to cook this or cook that, nor even complain about her choice of meals because it depends. The guests eat whatever she feels like cooking, yet she complains that she has to cook for extra people, which takes effort and time, and also since I sit with the guests, then she has to serve them by bringing coffee or preparing the table, etc. since I told her I don't do these chores, but I thought that since this is her area of responsibilities, then where's the problem? I invited a few guests for Thanksgiving, 6 people, and when she found out, she lost it, saying I should have consulted her first. I said there was no need because they would just eat whatever she cooked, no problem. But she said she wasn't going to agree to cook a large portion and for 6 extra people. Aside from serving them and handling hosting, that is too much for her. I told her she was making a big deal out of it and she just stopped freaking out over a few extra plates and glasses and whatnot. She said she didn't agree, but then I eventually had the guests over, and after they left, she started yelling at me, saying she was not mine and my guest server, and that I should stop having them over. That is when I told her very sternly that it's my house, and I get to invite whoever I want, whenever I please, and called her unreasonable to react like that, instead of being welcoming to the people who wanted to spend time with us, unlike her family who cut us off completely. But she shouted that she was done with being on my beck and call and having to be forced to take care of my guests in terms of serving and cooking just because it's a part of chores, and told me if I want to continue to have guests over, then I will have to step up and cook for them myself, which I thought was quite rude and unfair of her. We went back and forth in this argument, and she then stopped talking to me and started giving me the silent treatment, making me feel like I've committed some sin by having guests over. Information. I just wanted to explain that my wife's main issue isn't about cooking itself, but having to cook extra for the guests, which is understandable, and I tried to compromise by suggesting we set time limits for when my guests visit, to avoid having to include them in dinners and whatnot, and also suggested we limit the frequency of those visits. But she stated she will still have an issue with it, and gave me the options of either handling the hosting myself, or just completely stop having them over, or take them out to restaurants. But then restaurants consume money, and she was the one who advised against going to restaurants. Also, the reason I said it's my house, I meant that it's my house too, and not as if it's mine alone or hers alone. My wife has a huge part in it, and she definitely gets a say in what goes on and what doesn't. And we don't usually disagree except for this issue. You're the a-hole, OP. Seriously though, you are most definitely in the wrong here. 6 people is not a few. It could amount to tripling of a workload. And if you're doing it without asking or even giving her any warning, then that is just awful. It's rude and disrespectful. How could you treat her like that? She's supposed to be an equal partner in this marriage, and you're treating her like an inferior. Have you cooked for the number of people you bring over at all? It's not just a difference in the amount of ingredients. The time and effort required increases significantly too. Have a rethink about how much you value her, what she does, and how you treat her. Now for some comments. OP, you remind me of my dad. He would always announce last minute that X and Y are coming over, and mom would have to produce a miracle to feed the guests. Otherwise, she's a bad host. Oh, tomorrow is Saturday and we get to relax for a bit after work? Nope. Cousin John and wife and 3 kids are coming over. Commence emergency grocery shopping and hours spent in the kitchen while he watches TV. They fought a lot over this because he's an inconsiderate ass just like you. You're the a-hole. If I sprang surprise dinner guests on my wife even once, she would consider it ample justification for having me murdered. And she would also not only expect me to do all the cooking and cleaning, but would spend the time on the sofa with her feet up and the sound of television clearly and ostentatiously audible. Either that or she would just leave the house and not come back until they had gone. My guests, my headache. She came in as I was writing this and firmly endorses all the above, especially the first sentence. You're the a-hole, as if this wasn't obvious. You're the a-hole, dude. What the F? If I was your wife, I would have left for Thanksgiving with the kids and let you handle it so you could learn how much work cooking is. 6 extra people is extra food. A ton of extra food. Which is a lot of extra work. If it was 1 extra person, she wouldn't have to make any adjustments. You clearly do not do half the work in the house. If she's doing all the hosting for your ungrateful self, that's a huge extra burden. And you know that, or you would have just offered to do it yourself. So many of these posts make me wonder how these dudes get married. Who takes them and why? Ugh. Story 3. Sister-in-law, 25 female, has always been close to my son, 5. And my son used to be quite fond of her. In late 2018, sister-in-law lost her baby at 34 weeks. She was really devastated. After this, she started acting weird. She would ask to see my son a lot and offer to babysit, etc., which wasn't weird by itself, but then she started treating him like he was much younger. Baby talking to him, trying to swaddle him, etc. It made me super uncomfortable. It was like she was close to being delusional, and my husband and I stopped letting her see him. At first, I would just make excuses and say my son has XYZ things to do, but then eventually just told her husband and I didn't feel comfortable with him being around her. At the time, everyone in the family, including her husband, supported me in this. She would call and say things like she missed her baby, referring to my son, but I would just say make some excuse. Her behavior got even weirder for a while. She started treating her cat like a baby, putting the cat in a pram and walking around, etc. And I essentially just cut her off. My husband stayed in touch with her and her husband. Over Christmas, she called me asking me to let her please see my son and that she missed her nephew. She apologized if she made me uncomfortable before and claimed that she's better now and that she's been having therapy all year. I wasn't so convinced. She was in therapy even when she was behaving weird, so I don't know how effective it was. I saw her over Christmas and she seemed normal, but she seemed fine before even. I refused, saying that I was still uncomfortable. She started begging and saying she really missed her nephew, etc., but eventually said she understood. But then she must have also asked my husband, because he was trying to convince me to let her see him, and saying that he wants it to be a joint decision, but he might just let his sister see him, because he's my son too. My in-laws are also taking sister-in-law's side. They've gone so far as to say I'm being heartless, when I'm just trying to protect my child. I just don't want him exposed to all this. I'm looking out for him first. Am I the a-hole for not wanting my sister-in-law to see my son because of her strange and alarming behavior? Am I being overprotective? Now for some comments. Honestly, it seems unpopular, but you're the a-hole. It feels like you're not being considerate of what she went through. She apologized and was in therapy. I want to protect your kid, so supervise it, make it clear to your son that if he gets uncomfortable, he has the power to set boundaries, and you be there to make sure things go well. I'm so glad my loved ones don't cut me out for my mental health problems. You're the a-hole. This woman is part of your family and experienced a life-changing traumatic experience. You characterize her grieving as weird and are otherwise describing her in a disgusting way. You say you cut her off and you're trying to alienate her from her nephew because of an issue she was dealing with after losing a baby. What the FOP? You wouldn't have been the a-hole if you hadn't worded your post in a way that makes you come off as lacking empathy and being immature. But your description of your husband's sister is sad to read. It seems less like concern for your son and more like shunning a family member for showing signs of a mental illness. I hope she's doing well. No a-holes here. It sounds like your sister-in-law was suffering from both the trauma of her pregnancy loss as well as some severe postpartum psychosis. Classically, people typically picture PPP as the mom who suddenly gets the immense urge to hurt herself and her children. But it also can come in forms like what you saw with her. As your son's mother, you have a right to decide who you want and feel comfortable allowing to spend time with him. With that being said, if they were close and she has seriously spent a full year apart from your son and in therapy, likely also on the adequate medications as well, personally, I would be open to slowly easing back some supervised time between your sister-in-law and son. See how she is around him for, let's say, a couple hours. The only way you're truly going to find out if she's doing better will be that way.